Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Prime Minister Wini Yassin has returned from a one-day official visit to Jakarta, during which he met with Indonesian President Joko Widodo to discuss a wide range of issues involving our two countries. Now, tonight on the show, we're going to be focusing on bilateral matters, everything from trade and the environment to public health. Our first guest tonight is Herizal Hazri. He's the Chief Executive at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. Good evening, Herizal.
Hello, hi.
Why do you think that there was a need for an official visit to Indonesia right now? I mean, it's not that we're just in the middle of a pandemic, but we're also in the middle of an emergency, in the middle of the MCO spiraling COVID numbers daily, and not to mention a fragile economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I don't think there's a reason not to basically have a visit to begin with, because I actually do think that the business of a nation should not stop during a pandemic. I think as we all would probably agree that, doctors and nurses should go to work. I think prime ministers also should go to work, and visiting a very important member country, a neighboring country, is really part of his job.
Herizal, if I could ask you, because in fact the Prime Minister has done a lot of international engagements over the last year since he took power in March 2020, but he'd done all that through online meetings, some very high-level meetings. Why not do the same with President Joko Widodo?
No, I think it's very different, Sharaad. I think a lot of the meetings that was done was not a direct bilateral, sort of like formal bilateral meetings, and this is a very different sort of like approach. You're right. There has been a lot of multilateral sort of like engagements. I remember we did the APEC with many countries virtually, but that's very different than face-to-face discussion. Bilateral. This is in fact his first bilateral meeting outside Malaysia, and I quite frankly think it's a bit delayed. I think it should have actually been done a lot earlier.
Okay, so he did go there one day. He stayed over. It was a quick visit and quick talks. What was the most, I think, I'm wondering if whether COVID-19, whether the pandemic featured very significantly in the talks. We saw the outcome that covered everything from palm oil to migrant workers to, talking about perhaps a green lane. Did COVID feature heavily in the discussions?
Yes, it was one of the things that was discussed. I was, not part of the meeting. I have no idea how these things are featured, which is more important than the other. But what I know for sure is the plans how to deal with COVID and the exchange of information and experiences, especially on vaccination, was high on the agenda.
Herizal, apart from government-to-government agenda setting, ISIS Malaysia, think tanks around the region, intellectuals, the media also set agendas. I mean, from your perspective, what are the important issues that Malaysia and Indonesia have to resolve, considering they share these, immense borders, both sea as well as land borders with each other, and have very strong ties, including, with millions, literally, of Indonesians working here. What do you think ought to be the focus?
Well, I think the top three things on my list would be, number one is for both countries to come up with a particular standard that is recognized by both countries as well as the international community on how we deal with the environment. And this is, focusing at the palm oil industry. And, Malaysia and Indonesia, the world's largest sort of, palm oil exporter, And there are ways for us to deal with the impact to the environment. We need to set certain standards, environment as well as labor standards and so on and so forth. So that's number one on my list. Second on my list is really to think about how we can, both of the countries can think about a more sort of sustainable engagement in terms of the exchange of labor force. Malaysia imports a lot of Indonesian labor force, and Indonesia is also very keen to import Malaysia, high-skilled workers to a certain extent. Again, we need to figure this out. We need to ensure that if, the exchange of labor will continue, and I hope it does, because it's very important aspect of the economy, we need to regulate this, and we need to figure out ways on how we can protect, people and ensure that, trafficking and human smuggling, so on and so forth, can be dealt with. Number three on my agenda is really sustainable development between Malaysia and Indonesia. And we know that the capital of Indonesia will be moving to Kalimantan. And we know that once capital moves, a lot of other things it could bring development. But as well, if it's not well planned, it could cost a lot to the environment. Kalimantan is has one of the oldest jungles in the world. And we share that with Sarawak as well as Sabah. So I think if this is an opportunity for us to start new. And I always argue that we can't turn a bad time and deal with, the development of Kuala Lumpur or Penang or Selangor. But we can do something about this. And I think both countries need to sit down and think about it carefully. So those are the three things on my list.
Okay, so you brought up the three things. I'm going to focus on the first one, the palm oil. So there's been a lot of concern about the shrinking access and also demand for palm oil from the European market. This was after the EU in 2019 decided that they were going to phase out palm oil from their biofuels by 2030. Malaysia and Indonesia make up at least, I think, about 85% of the global palm oil market. Why is this now a concern? I know that there's been a lot of discussion about the anti-palm oil lobby and campaign. So now Malaysia and Indonesia working together, but is there an urgency now that perhaps wasn't there before?
I hope there is. And I hope it's not just because of the reactions of the market. I hope it is because both countries come to realization that there are better ways to develop the palm oil industry. There are better ways to regulate, and there are better ways to deal with the labor force. For whatever reason, I think it's worth it. And, and I think both countries are realizing that, despite being fierce competitors in the palm oil market, they need to work together. And this is something very good and should be promoted.
Herizal, where Malaysia and Indonesia do seem to be competitors, at least in terms of the headlines in the papers and the media, is foreign direct investment. Indonesia seems to be going guns. It really is attracting a lot of high value investments, and Malaysia seems to be now, with the recent reports about FDI either being hesitant or flowing out of Malaysia because of the perceived risk of political instability. What do you make of that dimension of the relationship between the two countries?
First of all, Sharaad, I don't think we can compare apple to apple between FDI flows into Indonesia and FDI flows into Malaysia. I think it's a very separate sort of the country is actually at a very separate stage. Indonesia, obviously a bigger nation with, a lot more sort of population. It has a lot of more economic opportunity, for instance, compared to Malaysia. I think Malaysia has a very different sort of set of problems, and Malaysia needs to deal with it. We need to sort of look into starting new industries. We need to look into attracting high-level investments into high-end sort of manufacturing. We have to be more innovative. I think we have to create more sort of online, digital sort of marketplace, so on and so forth. So, on one hand, it's good to see, what Indonesia is doing and good to sort of realize that, we probably have to buck up because, we need to attract FDI. But I don't think, both countries are competing with the same kind of FDIs.
Okay, you also mentioned, Herizal, in the three things that you said you wanted to see, the second one you mentioned labor and the perhaps the flow of high-skilled labor to Indonesia. There was also talk about a reciprocal green lane. How likely is that to happen in the near future? And also, I'm wondering if a green lane is perhaps looking at air travel, at sea travel for business travelers. But if you look at perhaps the other segments of migrants in Malaysia, Indonesian migrants into Malaysia, what is really a green lane because our borders are so porous?
Well, two different things again. I think, Melissa, first of all, the green lane that is proposed, I don't think we have a choice. I don't think, this is something that we can ponder and think whether we should do it or not. I think we should just go ahead because the world is moving so fast, and we need to be more competitive. We need to cut bureaucracy. We need to look at better ways to assist, the flow of people, especially post-COVID. On the other hand, you talk about having a porous border. Actually, that sort of like involves a different kind of security arrangement between Malaysia and Indonesia to help patrol the porous borders to ensure that, if we have a green lane, that is going to be the main sort of like, entry point and not other points. But quite frankly, I don't think people who enter a country illegally would even be bothered to think about entering a country whether they have a green lane or not. I think the approach is slightly different.
Yeah, Herizal, of course, the recent talk about green lanes has to do with the status of the pandemic in individual countries. Singapore had a green lane with Malaysia and it's shut it down for 3 months, I believe. Now, I want to ask you really about your views on the possibilities that Indonesia might not succeed in its vaccination program. It's very ambitious. It's already started, but the numbers are very high, and observers say the logistical challenges are huge. And what's the almost unthinkable risk to ourselves if Indonesia fails?
If any country fails in the region, the risk is high. More than other countries will probably be Indonesia because it's huge. You're talking about 200 over million population. So the short answer is yes, definitely that would pose, a certain, concern for Malaysia. However, I think the vaccine, if the vaccine works in Malaysia, we can get half of the story sort of like, told, right, done. Like we can be a little bit more comfortable in opening our economy. But yeah, if Indonesia fails, or any other country for that matter fails in Southeast Asia, I think the impact will be immense.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that COVID-19 did feature very heavily in the discussions. I know it was only a 4-hour meeting, but I'm wondering, what do you see as the nature of cooperation between Malaysia and Indonesia when it comes to the pandemic management?
I think there's a few key things. Number one is we know that Indonesia is also doing mass testing. I think Malaysia would benefit with some early knowledge about how the testing is going, what the data are looking like. Secondly, I think in terms of, the logistics of how Indonesia has, done its vaccination program or carried out its vaccination program is important for us. Indonesia have already some experience doing it in remote areas. We need to learn about it. We need to be very good at it, especially because we have to deal with, some remote areas as well, especially in Sabah and Sarawak. I think Indonesia's approach to basically managing or handling the arrival of the vaccines is also something that is important to us. But generally, I think apart from that, the medical world has no borders. I think if it's a doctor in Indonesia, if it's a doctor in Malaysia, if it's a doctor in China, that knowledge and that experience that you have can always be shared. And I think it's important for both governments to allow this exchange. And this is one of the key things of why I feel like meetings like this is actually important. For the governments to be comfortable, for both of the leaders to to be comfortable of sharing knowledge and information, especially, at times of COVID.
Thank you so much, Harizal, for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your time. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this, but more on this topic in just a couple minutes. Stay tuned. Hi, thanks for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Now, in the wake of Prime Minister Yasin's return from his 4-eye meeting with Indonesian President Joko Widodo, many bilateral matters have come into full view. Let's continue our discussion about some of those issues that will affect both our nations. Joining us from Jakarta now, we have Andreas Harsono. He's a researcher at Human Rights Watch based in Jakarta. Welcome, Andreas, to the show. The Malaysian media gave a lot of attention to Yasin's visit to Indonesia. It made a lot of headlines. How was it received in Indonesia? Was there as much fanfare, as much interest in the visit and the outcome of the talks?
Oh yeah, it's there. I mean, it's on Kompas, the largest serious newspaper here. It's on the Jakarta Post. It's on many social media. It is on President Jokowi social media accounts. So the coverage is pretty big. In Indonesia, there are two most important TV stations. One is Metro TV. The visit was there, of course. And then the other one is TV One. It's like 60 until 70% of Indonesians get the most important information from those two TV channels. So the visit was there.
Andreas, this was a first foreign visit for Yasin since taking power in March last year. Does President Joko Widodo get a lot of foreign visitors? Has he been receiving a lot of foreign delegates since the pandemic broke last year?
Not as many as before, of course, but Prime Minister Suga of Japan was here, if I'm not mistaken, last month. It was also Prime Minister Suga's first foreign visit after he became the Prime Minister.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe you can give us a little bit of an update as to the situation, the COVID-19 situation in Indonesia. I think we're all quite curious to know how the pandemic has impacted not just Indonesia and that its health systems, its public health systems, but also the economy. Has Indonesia been under lockdown, and how has Indonesia weathered the last year?
There is actually no lockdown in Indonesia. There are semi-lockdown over the last 10 months, 11 months, because President Jokowi quietly, according to people who know him well, does not believe that Indonesians are disciplined enough to have a lockdown. At the same time, he was nervous if the economy was affected, because if foodstuffs are disappearing from the market, from department stores, it is going to be a big problem. If you take a look at Indonesia history, every time there is a crisis, Asian economic crisis, 97, 98, the Cold War, 65, 68, 45, the end of World War II, food disappearing from the market. And you know what happened? A lot of people were killed. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. I think President Jokowi knows that very well, that he keep on the economy going on a little bit slower, but not to make food stuff to disappear from the market. If it is to disappear, it is going to be dangerous.
Andreas, has there been a change in strategy by the Indonesian government? We understand that the health minister that was, there in the start of the pandemic has been replaced. Mr. Terawan Agus Puranto was seen as had made some really odd comments publicly. He's now been replaced. And has that changed the dynamics or strategy for the Indonesian government in managing the pandemic?
The new minister is widely recognized better in communicating. he also talked more sense. He admitted that there are data that have to be fixed that are not accurate. And he believed that data should be accurate to make good decisions. He also talked about things that are negative and telling the public, look, this is the situation, we are running out of basically hospital beds. The worst areas in Indonesia that are the worst hit are mainly the island of Java, Indonesia's most populous island, and Bali, and then the southern part of Sulawesi. Those are the worst areas hit by the pandemic. The others, Sumatra, Kalimantan, Eastern Indonesia, basically they are better. Of course, they are still bad, but not as bad as those in Java. I'm living in Jakarta. Basically, I don't leave my apartment over the last 11 months. But I'm lucky.
Oh, wow.
I have a rooftop garden, so I can go up and do gardening.
Has his transparency and his openness in admitting where the bottlenecks are, where the difficulties lie in managing the pandemic, has that helped build confidence in the Indonesian public? I know confidence took a hit with the previous health minister, but has that confidence and trust been regained, rebuilt?
Well, again, these are some numbers. Indonesia has ordered about 300 million vaccine, but only 3 million are already here. And as of yesterday, only 700,000 doses had been used. So it is very, very tiny percentage. And of course, it is a challenge to vaccinate a country as huge and as archipelago like Indonesia. Not enough medical standard freezer, not to say boat trip, plane trip, management. The president targeted that in 18 months, everyone had been vaccinated. But a lot of epidemiologists, they thought that it might be at least 2 years. So by the end of 2022, if 70% of Indonesians had been vaccinated, we are lucky.
That's very interesting because we're already seeing numbers coming out from countries where vaccination programs are steaming ahead, like Israel, where actually the effects, the positive effects of the vaccination programs are already showing. I do want to ask, though, about Indonesia's choice of this particular, and at least the one that's being rolled out, the CoronaVac by Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine. Why was that chosen? And is there are there issues of diplomacy that are underpinning this particular choice?
Oh, it is complicated, of course. One is there is a scarcity of vaccine all around the world. Even the US, European countries, they are fighting for vaccine. And second, prices. Pfizer is more expensive than Sinovac. And the third, the treatment of the Chinese vaccine is needing better freezer rather than the very freezing temperature that Pfizer needs. So a lot of consideration. And of course, there are diplomatic effort from China to provide this vaccine in areas where the Western, so-called Western vaccine are not available. It's complicated, but that is the one that is available in Indonesia right now.
I understand. I want to ask you about what you think would be the biggest challenge to Indonesia rolling out its national vaccination program. Is it the logistics because of how populous Indonesia is, because of how much geographical area needs to be covered, or is it about a question of hesitancy? We've seen articles come out about the skepticism of some segments of the population towards vaccine. Is that the issue at hand?
Sorry, can you say it again?
What is the biggest challenge when it comes to the national vaccine rollout? Is it logistical or is it about vaccine hesitancy?
Oh, both. Let me trying to describe how will you deliver a vaccine to, not to say Papua, even Bengkulu in southern Sumatra. you have to take the plane and then driving like 10 hours, 15 hours, and you are there. There is no freezer. At the same time, there are a lot of conspiracy theories about the vaccine, even among some health workers. So it is complicated.
Andreas, is there
not to
any
say the media also muddle about this vaccine, saying that someone already get one vaccine and he got the coronavirus. It's scary, but it is there.
Andreas, is there any chance that the vaccination program in Indonesia will fail, that it will not achieve its targets, and that we will see some cross-border infection, coming from Indonesia to Malaysia?
I really don't know. The situation is very complicated. I wish I know, but I do not know the answer. But I just read a book about the 1920 pandemic on the island of Java. The number of deaths is very diverse because, again, statistic was not available, not reliable at the time, but the number is between 500,000 until 6.5 million, and it was a century ago.
Right. Andreas, thank you so much for joining us on this show tonight. We really do appreciate your time and your insights. All the best to you. That's all we have for you in this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Don't forget to get the latest news and info on COVID-19 vaccines at astroawani.com and the Astro Awani app. Thank you so much for watching Consider This tonight. Good night.